Growing up in Southeast Asia, I've had numerous encounters with things I can never scientifically explain. From the annual insanity of the 7th lunar month, where the gates of hell are supposedly opened and the dead roam the earth looking for food, to the far less frequent and predictable run-ins with Pontiacs. It seems that the minor, heavily undeveloped regions of Asia, such as where I used to live, were melting pots of different people, cultures, and of course their horror stories. However, those stories are tales for another time. This entry involves the Indonesian rainforest and why it is burned almost annually, blanketing the region in pollutants, particles, and powders in an unforgiving haze. I suppose I should start from the beginning. My birth, in fact. Bear with me here. This is the only way I can think of to explain the circumstances which caused me to eventually wander into the Indonesian forest and begin a journey that took a skeptical biologist that specialized in veterinarian science around the world exploring the supernatural, and eventually led me to end up as the owner of a shitty rundown motel in a different continent. I was born being supposed to have died. That's the easiest way to put it. Prematurely bursting the water, I came out a month early and with slightly underdeveloped lungs, a birth defect that could pose a minor inconvenience to anyone, let alone an infant learning how to breathe. I also seem to have won some sort of lottery, in that I was born with asthma on top of my lung issues, and eczema, specifically sensitive, dry skin that reacted very unpleasantly to heat and sweat, both of which were in ample abundance when you live so close to the equator. Daily life was a struggle, and I'm supposed to have died far more times than I actually have. Probably explains why I seem to be some sort of magnet for the supernatural. But more to the point of this entry, my daily life, it turned from a mere struggle into an indescribable suffering when the haze kicked in. The haze, it is supposedly caused by the burning of the local forest, so as to both clear the land and provide fertile land for the growing of crops, both sustenance and cash. Its effects on the region were twofold. On top of the released pollutants over my struggling lungs and irritating my skin, it also raised the local temperature, turning it from a highly uncomfortable 35 degrees Celsius to a distinctly unbearable 40 degrees Celsius. This caused me to sweat more, which causes more skin irritation, and also it provides a means for the haze to be trapped on. In this case, meaning that the pollutants landing in the sweat, which further exacerbates an already horrible situation. The closest way I can come up with to describe life during the annual haze was to be trapped in a perpetually burning building due to the heat and the haze. However, rather less commonly, for someone like me, it also causes your skin to dry, flake, tear, and bleed. Not only can you barely breathe or see, but you feel your skin burning. It is an unbearable itch that you need to scratch, but you must not. Scratching it, it rips your only protective layer open. It lets in more toxins, makes it worse. If you've failed to resist, the smoky smell is soon joined by both sweat and blood. Needless to say, I came to loathe both the annual haze season and the country that refused to clean it up. Eventually, in my early 20s, I was able to leave the country for good. Unfortunately, at that age, I was both highly naive, arrogant, and idealistic. I had not formed a concrete plan on what to actually do with my life. In the limitless folly of youthful wisdom, I decided to travel to Indonesia. Perhaps see the cause of the haze and put a stop to it. Upon my arrival to the region, I felt what can best be described as a chill come down my spine. It was a warning. My instincts were screaming at me that this was not the place a person like me had any interest or reason to be in. It was a feeling that I was exceptionally intimate with. Truth be told, I picked that rainforest in that region at random. To this day, I still know not why I chose that one, but I did. If I were less wise, I would have said I wished for an eventful entrance. But in hindsight, I suppose those things were just more warning signs. Surrounding the rainforest had been some farms, mostly small scale, although there were some very large companies that I'd recognised and taken numerous pictures of. However, for some reason the rainforest, which was supposed to be in the midst of some minor deforestation, it was untouched. If not for the fact that I'd packed a trusty parang, or a slightly curved machete, I doubt that I would have been able to progress at all. It had been 2 days into my trek when I came across the first signs that something was off. I was in a clearing when I saw it. This clearing, it was all too unnatural. The boundaries, too even. And in the middle of it was a truck. It was bearing the logo of one of the companies I'd recognized. That was not the weird part. The weird part was that it had been abandoned, despite looking perfectly serviceable. This was a poor country. Nobody abandons a functioning truck, especially not one still surrounded by high-quality chainsaws and a dozen cans of gas. Thinking I may as well make some money from this, I grabbed a can and stuffed it in my pack. I then began to search the vehicles. Maybe there were stragglers or survivors if something terrible had happened. I regretted searching the vehicles almost immediately. There were skeletons inside, the kind that looked like all the flesh had been rotted off, and they've been lying in the sun for a few decades. But that was impossible. All this equipment, the chainsaws, the truck, it was almost brand new. Couldn't have been more than a year old. Hell, the cans still had gas in them, and the clearing, it hadn't shown signs of being reclaimed by nature yet. None of this added up. The next thought that came to my mind was that perhaps a wild animal had done this. That thought was debunked almost immediately. The skeletons, they wouldn't still be joined to each other, and the bones should have been cracked, the marrow drained. More importantly, anything that was big enough to take on over 10 men at once and strip them to the bone. There should have been some bite marks, surely. There were none. I walked around to the other side of the truck, hoping to look for clues, and I found a decently sized hut. It looked to be about one room, made of wood and straw, and it looked decades old. The door was wide open, and I decided to go and investigate. It was the smell that hit me first as I walked through. Remember how I'd mentioned the sickly sweetness that set off alarm bells in my head? This smell was different, but it produced the same effect. The air, It felt stale, like no one had been here in forever. Mold and dust compounded the staleness, and I felt my nose itch. The undercurrent of decay and rot, however, was probably what set it off. I found the source soon enough. Dozens upon dozens of skeletons piled up in the center. It was then they made their presence known to me. The first hint that I'd had, other than the alarm bells in my head, that they were there, was the loud buzzing that seemed to erupt around me from all directions, surrounding me in white noise. I collapsed, and I would have blacked out if not for the smell keeping me awake. As it stands, the sudden loud noise did serve to massively disorient me, like a sudden onset of tinnitus, except much louder. I felt blood coming out of my ears. Mercifully, however, the sound seemed to be fading rapidly. Too rapidly, perhaps. Despite the disorientation, my instincts were still active, and I figured that something was wrong when the area went deathly silent. A rainforest should never be silent. The background noise that all trekkers take for granted, the flow of the water, the falling of the leaves, the calls of the birds. It's all quite small, but it's always there. When nature goes silent and still, something is wrong. Something is there. I wanted to run, but I could not. I wanted to scream in anger and fury, but no noise came out. I thought that I was just choked up, and I tried to scream even harder. Frustratingly, nothing came out, except I could feel the vibrations in my throat. I was making noise. I just wasn't hearing it. Then I saw the signs. The doorway I had come through, it offered me a view of the edge of the clearing. That is when I saw them approach. Perhaps saw was a bit of a misleading term. I couldn't see them. Literally, it was like there was nothing there, and yet something was telling me that there was something there. Then I began to see the grass, the branches, the undergrowth, part around seemingly thin air. Then I saw this happen at a different section of the clearing. And again, I didn't want to see it happen a fourth time. I saw the grass outside the hut part, and I panicked. Luckily, I'd kept my parang close at hand, and I slashed wildly at the open entranceway. The shriek of pain and fury, it was disturbingly human, and yet, at the same time, it wasn't. It couldn't be. I saw two green lights glare at me from outside the hut as I slammed that door shut and pressed my weight against it. After what felt like an eternity, the pounding outside the hut, it finally stopped, and I had time to take stock of the situation. I was stuck in a hut, in a clearing, in the middle of a rainforest, with no one knowing where I was. The hut, it was watched by at least one angry thing, with probably a lot more surrounding it, and I still couldn't hear. I still don't know what they were, even after years of trying to learn about it. What I did learn was that the noise was the only warning they were around. It begins as an extremely loud buzzing, but it fades as they approach. I've hypothesized over the years that it was a hunting strategy. The initial noise disorients the prey, and the fading noise, it relaxes them. It makes them think that the cause of this is leaving, when really, it's just closing in. They also seem to be invisible, although I'd seen the two lights glaring. I looked around, looking for any more, and I wish I had not. Dozens of green lights glared at me through the windows of the hut. I shuddered. I couldn't keep this up. Eventually, they'd get in. I had to do something. Something that hopefully involved whatever I had in my kit. The plan was simple enough. I make a run for it. Except that they'd probably catch me. I had to lighten the load. Hopefully, whatever I got rid of would also help to serve as a decoy. Maybe get rid of one or two of these things. Getting the gas from the can I had borrowed, it was a bit difficult and stressful since I had to keep an eye out for break-ins. I made sure to get at least some of the skeletons covered as well. May as well give the dead a funeral pyre while I was doing it. When I put the gas on the skeletons, the things outside seemed to get more violent, rattling the hut. But luckily, it held. The hut was surprisingly sturdy for its age. I rushed to the doorway and I prepared a match. I had one chance at this. The hut went up in a blaze of bluish-green fire, and I sprinted out of there, sprinting past the truck, accidentally knocking over another gas can while doing so. The buzzing was coming back again now, and I'll take that over the silence any day. I felt something brush past my arm, but I kept sprinting. The buzzing, it was getting louder now, with some words underneath, and I could feel my ears bleeding again. I didn't care. I had to escape. They found me the next day, collapsed, just outside of the rainforest. I woke up a few hours later in a local village, surrounded by scared villagers and a stern-looking old man. I tried to communicate, but they didn't speak English, and I didn't speak their dialect of Bahasa. Luckily, a military type had apparently been stationed there, coincidentally, and heard about my story. He seemed to be pretty interested in what I'd seen, or not seen, and didn't seem to be skeptical. After I gave him my full account, he radioed in to someone and told me not to worry, but he'd need to talk to me in the villages first. According to the villagers, the man translated, the rainforest was cursed. Something was inside. Something that preyed on the unwary guests of the rainforest. Something that could strip a man to the bone within minutes. But that was not the worst part. It seemed that the more they prayed, the more of them appeared. The villagers said it took their prey's spirits and turned them into more of those things. How true this was, he did not know. Although, I shuddered when I remembered the pile of skeletons. The local villagers defended themselves with knives soaked in lime juice when they had to enter that rainforest, and they only did so in groups of 4 or more. The worst omen, he said, was when one of them didn't hear the buzzing, but the language. If even one of them heard it, the entire expedition was doomed, either to failure if they were able to escape, or death if they were not. My face went pale as the man was called outside the building by more military. I got up to follow. I saw a few planes soar overhead, pouring something over the rainforest. I saw soldiers entering the rainforest in groups of 4, each group carrying a flamethrower, all of them wearing ear protection. But the sight that still haunts me to this day was the look of fear on each of the villagers' faces as they watched me scratch at dry, flaky skin on my arm, the area bleeding and raw.